So I'm just going to introduce our moderator so that he can introduce our guest. So moderating we have Logan Jastremski, co-founder and partner at Frictionless Capital, and a swimmer, I believe. And a swimmer.
Excellent. Well, since we are the first panel today, I know there's been a wide variety of talks from kind of technical to kind of high-level overview of the future. I'm hoping that we can kind of liven up the crowd a little bit, hopefully get some spicy debates. But this conversation is titled Digital Gold and Beyond. We have a wonderful panel here today. I'll actually just pass the mic to each of them and allow them to do their own intros. If you guys could just go down the line and do 1-2 sentences about yourself while you're on the panel.
I was hoping you would tell me. So yeah, I'm Udi Wertheimer, Taproot Wizards. I'm very big into ordinals. I've been big into Bitcoin for many years, but now into ordinals, we'll talk about that.
I'm Leland. I do venture at Galaxy. I have lots of really bad takes, which I hope you'll hear soon.
John Riggins with BTC Inc. We do Bitcoin media, Bitcoin Magazine, and the Bitcoin Conference, and then have a venture arm focused on the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Amazing. And again, I'm Logan Jastremski, managing partner at Frictionless Capital. But so maybe to kick off the conversation here, again, the title of this conversation is Digital Gold and Beyond. But I wanted to maybe start with perhaps a slight controversy within the Bitcoin white paper and really talking about kind of Satoshi's vision of peer-to-peer electronic cash. So maybe going down the line, can you just maybe elaborate a little bit if you think starting off Bitcoin has kind of fulfilled some of the vision that Satoshi has outlined?
I think Bitcoin, like many things, since Bitcoin have existed for 12, 13 years now, the narratives around it changed a lot over time. And similarly, I guess the white paper talks a lot about payments, Bitcoin being this payment system that you use to make payments in a decentralized way, and really explains why it's important. But the payment use case doesn't seem to have been catching on, not in Bitcoin, not in the rest of the cryptocurrency ecosystem really either. And digital gold ended up being this thing that a lot of people are talking about. And I think that there's probably other things that Bitcoin can be useful for, but maybe not payments. I don't know about the payments.
Leland?
I really like how you say, has Bitcoin fulfilled Satoshi's vision? And my mind immediately jumped to Bitcoin SV. And so, given sort of your leading questions, has Bitcoin fulfilled the original white paper's vision? I'd say no. I think Satoshi vision does that instead. Bad take. So I think today we've realized Bitcoin is much more than the original white paper, and that's why we have things like Babylon Chain rise up.
It was a spicy way to intro this with cash, Satoshi's vision. We've had a fun 5 years of people taking things from the white paper and trying to make Bitcoin something else based
Magical.
on words there. Satoshi gave us something, and it's kind of up to the community to see what people wanted to use it for. And digital gold has been a use case that's caught on. Payments, when they have to be censorship resistant, has caught on in certain ways. And I'm still bullish on payments as something that exists as a Bitcoin important use case long term, but still a developing thing.
In terms, I guess, kind of staying on the decentralized, censorship-resistant money aspect, maybe perhaps back to you, John. I think today Bitcoin was adopted in El Salvador. It's being used in places like Turkey that have very high inflation. Can you kind of talk about kind of that self-sovereignty aspect and also just as a hedge to kind of hyperinflation?
Yeah, incredibly important in my view, long term for Bitcoin still to be that eventual global reserve currency, eventually replace the global financial system that we have. And where there's need is where you first see it being used there. So, you mentioned El Salvador. It was kind of a top-down government decision. Maybe them wanting to rely less on the IMF and World Bank and kind of U.S. Kind of hegemonic institutions moving forward. But definitely some great examples that we write about a lot in Bitcoin Magazine, from refugees in Ukraine right now, Afghanistan, people needing to take wealth out of their countries, on a thumb drive versus holding coins in their stocks. Definitely an important thing, and something that Bitcoin fulfills its use case in.
And I guess more broadly, you also mentioned Satoshi kind of really started this movement, and it was really up to the community to take it in how it sees fit. And among that, or kind of along those lines, in Bitcoin history, there's been kind of numerous debates where the community has ultimately had very vicious debates and some key designs for the protocol, whether that's block size debates, kind of scaling the protocol itself, or even more recently with Taproot. So maybe open question to the panel. How do you view kind of Bitcoin's decisions to, over time, whether that's kind of implementing the Taproot fork, or the various kind of blockchain block size debates? How do you see the original Bitcoin and how it's evolved over time?
I think Bitcoin used to be at the forefront of research and development in crypto and blockchain. The key word here is used to be, though. It was the case probably like 5 years ago. And I think, you're describing like a decision to go down the path of Taproot and other things. I'm not even sure this was truly a decision. I almost view it as an indecision. I think I've been talking about this a lot, but I think Bitcoin development has stagnated in a very big way in the last few years. And it's not a fun thing to talk about. It also means there's opportunity, though, because there's a lot to catch up to, and I think we can, and I think there's value to be had if Bitcoin does catch up, which I really think it will. So that there's obviously a lot of we've been talking about this all day, and we'll be talking about this tomorrow and in this entire week about the many innovations happening in the crypto space. And I think Bitcoin can adopt some of them, but it is a question of use case too, as in like what makes sense for Bitcoin and what doesn't. A lot of things will not. And I think that's going to be a very interesting area to explore.
I think compared to Udi, I have a fairly different viewpoint. I think for me, my greatest fear holding crypto is one day I'm going to be walking down Stanford, then get run over by some micro-mobility scooter, and I wake up 10 years later, and the protocol has changed so much that my private keys no longer work. And so I don't really have that fear of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is fairly ossified. And so my favorite part, I do believe
Perfect time to take off the hat, too.
I thought it was falling down. But I think for me, I really value protocols that are very consistent and value backwards compatibility a lot. So you can disappear for 10 years or 20 years, and you still know that the protocol still works as it was originally intended. Versus, it's very hard for me to say that for other more nascent protocols that are around.
Yeah, I mean, I think an analogy that I sometimes like is that Bitcoin is this big jumbo jet in flight, and you can tinker a little bit, but you don't want to take it down while someone's before they wake up from their 10-year coma and don't wake up.
And I guess to this broader question that we as a community are really trying to figure out is, should Bitcoin ossify, or should it continue to be more expressive? And would that additional expressiveness allow more adoption of Bitcoin long term?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I would agree that a very important benefit of Bitcoin is that it's kind of stable and robust, and you know what to expect years into the future. That's a very important property of it that most other ecosystems probably don't have. But then when we talk about ossification, I would argue that Bitcoin didn't ossify really, in the sense that we did have, for example, the Taproot upgrade like 2 years ago. I would assume there would be more, but I think that the interesting thing about something like Taproot, like I wonder if how many people here feel like they could tell me what Taproot is and what it does, like the Taproot upgrade of Bitcoin. And it is literally 0 people, like not even one.
Can you raise your hands if you know what Taproot is?
There's 1, okay. 2. So and this wasn't a trick question. I genuinely believe that Taproot is, it's funny, it's a word that I guess people heard, but I don't think anyone knows what it does. And it's not a coincidence because it's not doing anything. So so here's the thing. The upgrade happened and Bitcoin did not ossify, like changes happen, but I think that the community is not aware of what the changes are. And I think if the community was aware, it might have asked for different changes.
And maybe passing it to John, you've spent a lot of time in the Bitcoin community covering Bitcoin at Bitcoin Magazine. Over kind of that tenure that you have had focused specifically on Bitcoin, are there any kind of key takeaways or kind of milestones that you're like, this is a major success for Bitcoin as a whole?
Yeah, so I joined Bitcoin Magazine and kind of immediately moved over to China around the time that the scaling debate was really picking up. And they're in China, the main companies there, the miners, a few exchanges, and there's really just a big debate at the time in the industry around some of the scaling Bitcoin events that I think you've mentioned coming into this conference. But that scaling debate was, I think, the most important thing that's happened in the last 10 years, and how it turned out. There were teams from Blockstream and people from the U.S. kind of making the rounds, talking to Chinese miners. We saw the risk of centralization and how Bitcoin can be robust in those scenarios. I think that's the most important time that I've seen in Bitcoin. I'm curious your take on that time in terms of how you thought about it then, how you think about it now.
Yeah, I think it was a really interesting time. It was really interesting to live through, right? Like there was a ton of drama and yeah, I think some important decisions were made about, or lessons were learned about the decentralization of the network. But also, I think like it is a very important historic lesson. We can learn a lot from history, but I think it's really important we look into the future too and how we can use Bitcoin to help the lives of people today, which is probably not going to be very related to the lessons and the decisions we made back then. It is, an interesting historic lesson, but I think that's all it is. And like the scaling debate, we like to talk about scaling. I don't think Bitcoin has a scaling problem right now, in the sense that I don't think there's a ton of people standing in line to use it and can't because of the scaling issue. Even with ordinals kind of increasing demand for block space in the last 6 months, and today, even today, after some of the ordinals craze has kind of slowed down, even today I think that transaction fees on the main chain are almost 10 times higher than they were last year, even though we're in a bear market. So there's definitely demand for block space that wasn't there before. So that's, I think, is good. But still, I wouldn't say we have a scaling problem. I don't think that the first thing we need to tackle is scaling. There's probably other problems. Privacy is, to me, something that's close to my heart. Also, I think that ordinals is a great use case that ends up being very interesting to like a new group of people. So that's awesome. But yeah, I would focus on use cases more than scaling.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, Taproot ultimately enabled more functionality on top of Bitcoin, which ultimately enabled ordinals. I guess, passing it to you, Leland, do you feel like ordinals kind of changed Bitcoin and Bitcoin's kind of future?
What I really love about ordinals is it changed people's perception of what Bitcoin could be. I think Bitcoin, for a long time, people were like, oh, cool, digital gold transferring value around, but now I can have other forms of digital gold in the form of like NFTs or ordinals. And I think what was very surprising was that ordinals did much better than I expected. And I think it enabled a new venue for people who are really passionate or big on Bitcoin to find alternative assets that they could not, touch earlier because they were potentially sacrilegious. So ordinals is a way to access interesting assets on Bitcoin that are not counter to the Bitcoin thesis.
And maybe John, jump in as well. What are your thoughts in general kind of on the whole ordinal movement happening on top of Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, it really is a movement. And to Udi's point earlier, agree that, really until transactions are sustained at a more expensive level, there's not going to be that kind of, there's not going to be the impetus for people in Bitcoin to really develop scaling solutions for Lightning to be used. First kind of ordinals real pop was the impetus for Binance to implement some Lightning solutions for the first time. I think what I want to see is more use, and ordinals in the last 6 months has been a strong case there. We put the Bitcoin conference on in Miami, and ordinals was kind of the number one topic that people wanted to talk about. It was the number one kind of cultural thing that was a discussion point, partly thanks to this man here in these hats. But Udi, what was kind of your takeaway culturally in the scene there at the Bitcoin conference coming out of that panel? You probably talked about it a little bit, but here.
Yeah, so there's two things. There's the cultural aspect that is really fascinating, in my opinion. Before the Babylon talk, there was this question of how many people actually own Bitcoin, and I would say like it was about half of the people here would have said that they own or owned Bitcoin in the past. So like a lot of people who don't maybe identify as Bitcoiners, they maybe identify as crypto people, or maybe they identify as something else, but they do own Bitcoin. They do, they are bullish on it. They're interested in its long-term success. And I think that, the online Bitcoin community kind of pushed that sector out of the discussion, which I think is a mistake because it's the vast majority of Bitcoiners. They care about it. Probably not any, they might own more Bitcoin than the so-called Bitcoin maximalists. So they should be probably part of the culture and part of the discussion. So I think ordinals kind of helped bridge that gap. A lot of people who were from kind of a camp of like, yeah, we're bullish on Bitcoin, we're also bullish on other things, and also we have other hobbies. They finally found a home in the Bitcoin discussion, which I think is great, and I hope that continues. There's also like just practically, if we think that Bitcoin is digital gold, one of the use cases for gold is jewelry. You make like art and status symbols that you wear out of gold. It makes a lot of sense to do the same out of Bitcoin, I think. It's actually a pretty popular use case for gold, and I would expect that it would be similarly popular for Bitcoin if Bitcoin does become the digital gold of the world. So to me, it makes like perfect sense. Like, how are most people going to interact with Bitcoin? Probably through that, just like how most people interact with gold, through jewelry, not through other ways. Even if institutions end up holding the most of gold, for the ordinary person, it's probably going to be through that kind of stuff, through art, through like just status symbols and stuff like that. To me, that makes total sense.
On that topic, I think culture of whether it's Bitcoin or any other of these other smart contract platforms ultimately evolve over time. Bitcoin, I think, really kind of started with this cypherpunk movement and then kind of evolved into digital gold, built a fairly large fan base around that, kind of dubbed Bitcoin maxis, and now with Udi kind of push and Taproot really expanding into a new market. I guess my question being, does the culture of Bitcoin need to progress in this direction, or can it continue in kind of our version of like crypto Twitter and maximalist laser eyes?
Am I supposed to take this one?
Open question to the panel.
Go for it.
I'll just say one comment. So I've been in crypto since university, roughly 2015. So depending who I talk to, I'm either a dinosaur or a toddler. But I think what I've realized that over the last 7, 8 years, the community has shifted dramatically. In college, I went to Berkeley, which had a huge number of libertarians, and they really influenced my initial thinking towards cryptocurrency. And so at the time, we're like, anything that's not Bitcoin is like bad. Anything that doesn't value decentralization, doesn't value censorship resistance, like this is all like horrifying. As time went on, the community grew, and different community members have very different viewpoints for what they think blockchain should be. And so I think there's a really big open question of like, what should Bitcoin be? And I think over time, people have been more open, especially like post Taproot with ordinals. And I think it's a big question for a community is like, what type of future do we want to have? And we've seen that there's many different views, because like you have like Bitcoin Satoshi vision, Bitcoin Diamond, and all these unusual forks, which have very different philosophies.
It's funny with Taproot. Probably most of the audience doesn't know what Taproot is. We adopted the name Taproot for Taproot Wizards as kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke. Originally, the name Taproot comes from a soft fork upgrade to Bitcoin that as I said before, we believe it doesn't actually do much, and it accidentally enabled ordinals, unintentionally enabled ordinals. But that was not the intention. I believe that it's funny if you would have told the kind of the authors of Taproot that ordinals are going to happen, they would have not gone through probably. But yeah. So yeah, I think that in that sense, like there's in the community stuff, in the upgrade path for Bitcoin, I think there's going to be a lot of changes, because I think there's a lot of like inconsistencies, which Taproot actually kind of exemplifies. But what I do see in the last 8, 9, 10 months since ordinals started is that there's like this very big shift in the conversation around Bitcoin. Like you said, most importantly, in the perception that people have about it. Like suddenly, like it's okay. You know what? Maybe there are other things that Bitcoin can do that we didn't think about before. And I would agree that ideally, we would do those things without changing Bitcoin too much, or maybe not at all. But ordinals didn't change Bitcoin; they're just using it as it is.
Yeah, I mean, from our vantage point, we're certainly seeing a ton of renewed interest in some of the early Bitcoin OGs like yourself. I'll call you an OG, who have kind of gone on to dabble in other things and are saying, hey, wow, Bitcoin is now the exciting place to be working again. Somebody who's on the next panel, I think Albert at Startup Labs. We were talking to him earlier just about the percentage of the people who are applying there who aren't just new to the industry. They've been building on Ethereum or Cosmos for the last 5 years, and they're coming back to Bitcoin. So there's definitely momentum there. At the conference, we do like a pitch day competition, and we just see ramped up applicants every year. There's momentum here, and we're still in a bear market. To your point earlier, bear market's been brutal, and the number of people coming in looking to build is only growing, which is good.
And on the bear market topic, I think the best marketing for all of crypto, unfortunately or fortunately today, is number go up. And I think when you look at kind of the entire market cap of blockchain, it's less than $1 trillion, which is smaller than NVIDIA. And Bitcoin kind of gets compared to digital gold. What do you think it will take for it to kind of have a similar market cap to gold, which is approximately 10 trillion?
Yeah, when do we see that?
When do we see it? Or I guess when,
20x
or
the cycle,
what?
that'd be a lot. We could get there this cycle. I don't know.
Next cycle?
Next cycle, yeah.
Would there be any, that's bold. Is there anything that has to happen like in the economy or adoption standpoint, or is it just that Bitcoin's kind of inevitable and it will just take time to get there?
Some things are just generational, I think, like it's not a very exciting answer, but at some point, I think anyone who was, born in the last 30 years, 20 years, is going to take Bitcoin a lot more seriously than the previous generation probably. So like over time, I think naturally Bitcoin will take like a bigger percentage of portfolios for biggest institutions and so on. But that's going to take a while. That's not something that's going to happen next year, in my opinion. But who knows? So I do think that over generations, I can totally see that happening. I don't know if next cycle or not, but I hope so.
And maybe Leland, to you, just being a little bit more on the institutional side, what are some of the conversations that you're kind of hearing around just Bitcoin adoption, whether not specifically the Bitcoin ETF, but just general adoption, kind of more along the lines of institutional players?
I will caveat, I do focus on the venture side of the house, but occasionally I will hear chatter from more client-facing people. I think broadly, there's just more acceptance of Bitcoin and other crypto assets. I think the conversation is now more of a Bitcoin plus other assets. So whereas in the past was only Bitcoin. So I think broadly, institutional clients are very interested about crypto assets, but it's unclear sort of like where their attention and focus will be on.
Logan, one of the kind of trends, I guess, of the last cycle was, publicly traded U.S. companies holding Bitcoin on their balance sheet. MicroStrategy and Saylor, were a big part of the culture last cycle. You were at Tesla, I think, when they made that decision. Was that much of a discussion point internally, or were y'all so siloed that?
I left a little bit before Tesla decided to take the approach. I don't know if I can comment on too much of the specifics of internally. I will just say if Elon wants something done, it gets done. So Elon wanted it and Tesla made it happen.
Yeah, fair. We are looking for spiciness, though, if you want to go a little further.
I just don't want to break my NDA. But yeah, I mean, maybe touching on like the kind of ETF approval, I mean, obviously that unlocks kind of the 401k bid. Are you guys generally optimistic that ETF gets approved? I know BlackRock applied for the ETF. BlackRock historically has a very high batting average of when they apply, and then ETF gets approved. Any thoughts around kind of the more ETF flows into Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, no insider knowledge, but it seems like it's going to happen, right? It seems like it's going to happen. When it happens, I don't know. Obviously, it unlocks a lot of capital that hasn't been able to kind of find the right avenue into Bitcoin in the past. I mean, it's just a bullish thing coming into the next cycle.
Yeah,
Inside Galaxy.
No, I agree. Like people initially were like, "Oh, Grayscale, Trust, like these work really well," until they don't, and so I think people really want to have ETFs.
Yeah, I was because we wanted to talk sort of on the cultural side a little bit here. I was rereading a post that we made in 2018 about kind of reorienting our company around Bitcoin, launching the Bitcoin conference, and there were a few throwaway lines in there about ETF approval, in 2 weeks, in 2 months. So that this has been something that's been a part of the Bitcoin story for a long time, and honestly isn't something that's necessary for Bitcoin to achieve, for hyper-Bitcoinization to happen. And arguably there's some negative aspects of it too. What's your take? And being in Miami, what's kind of the glitz and glamour part of the U.S. Is Bitcoin culturally there, as much as it was in the kind of peak of the bull market? Were people talking ETF?
Miami definitely. It's been funny, kind of along the lines of COVID. Miami became a pretty big hub in terms of, I'd say, more openness, but also pretty crypto friendly. I would say that has continued. When the number is going up, everybody likes to say, I'm a part of this train and let's go. When number goes down, people don't like to talk about it as much, but I will say that culture and that imprint is still very vibrant within Miami. Bummed the conference isn't going to be in Miami again this year.
Yeah, maybe back in the future, but Nashville's a good spot.
Maybe one specific question. I mean, went to the Bitcoin Miami conference in 2021, and I think the conversation always kind of comes up about kind of Bitcoin's energy usage, whether adoption can be whether institutional with ESG mandates can kind of get over Bitcoin's electric use. What is your guys' general thoughts? Is this overplayed? Is it underplayed? Or does it not really matter long term?
I think that we can talk about like the differences between proof of work and proof of stake for hours and days and weeks. I think that the maybe most important takeaway is that we probably need to have both approaches. I think it's great that Bitcoin is continuing to use the proof of work approach, and I think it's good that we have another big system using the proof of stake approach. And you kind of want to hedge your bets on those kind of things. It's kind of important. So I'm just happy that that's the situation we're in. It was maybe not as great when Ethereum was a proof of work coin. I think it's actually really beneficial for both ecosystems to have that kind of hedging going on.
100% agree.
I guess another open question to the panel. Bitcoin by far is kind of the predominant proof of work blockchain. Do you think new proof of work blockchains in the future will emerge, or Bitcoin will prominently kind of be that category and other ones are just much kind of lesser and kind of thought?
I think if we look like a long time, like if you look in 2015, there were a lot of new like proof of work chains popping up, and then today the new chains that are rising are more proof of stake heavy, and I think especially after protocols like Babylon or like Eigenlayer, I think proof of stake is going to be kind of like here to stay. And so the only chain that will sort of remain proof of work, in my belief at least, is going to be Bitcoin. And I doubt there's going to be many new proof of work chains that come up. Though I will caveat, a lot of these new ZK protocols do have some sort of like mining component to it, like proof generation. And whether you consider like specialized hardware for generating ZK proofs mining, this might be semantic discussion, but like that will become much more common. I would not consider it mining necessarily.
No, it is fascinating. I mean, I think Bitcoin has had quite a few kind of vicious debates throughout its cycle, starting with kind of the Bitcoin block size, more recently with Taproot, and Taproot getting a lot of adoption. And more specifically, I mean, what kind of Taproot enables, do you think Taproot ultimately will allow for further scalability in either Lightning or the zero knowledge realm, layer 2s to settle on to Bitcoin, or should that not be a focus for Bitcoin? Maybe passing it to John.
Yeah, I think it will be. I think we just need that fee pressure to reach a point where it's necessary. And so, like I mentioned, we have a venture arm now that's interested in investing in and it's kind of what are going to be some of those release valves when we do have fee pressure sustained at high levels. So we're definitely bullish on that. Is Galaxy's venture arm, are y'all looking more closely at Bitcoin than you have in the past? Is it something that's, you'll have somebody in the room who's focused on it? What's the...
Yes, I think we're now more open to Bitcoin investing than we were in the past. Yes.
Cool, good.
Sorry, no specifics.
Interesting. Well, I'm happy to open it up to the floor if anybody has any questions to our panelists, whether about Taproot, kind of about Bitcoin's history, any particular topics.
Wait, Logan, can you share your favorite like Bitcoin hot take?
That's a good question.
He's shy.
Personally, I think Bitcoin is very interesting. I have always had a little bit of kind of reservations that if Bitcoin succeeds, that means like global currencies fail. And maybe that's kind of a sad view, just in terms of like Bitcoin, the money aspect. I think there's many other properties, but maybe that's kind of my spicy take.
I'll give you the happy path.
Let's go down.
Because David explained it, you always need to have an unhappy path, and that's what you're describing. So like if Bitcoin, yeah, like Bitcoin is kind of, I think the reason Bitcoin is interesting because it solves the unhappy path. If everything goes wrong in the world, at least, if all the fiat currencies like implode, at least we can use Bitcoin. And in that sense, hopefully it never happens, if you ask me. I know some people want it to happen, but if you ask me, hopefully that never happens. But I think a big part of why it's not going to happen is because Bitcoin is going to keep them honest. That's something that stable coins cannot do. That's something that, in my view, even Ethereum probably cannot do. But Bitcoin probably can keep policymakers honest, because if they truly mess up, then they, I think, kind of lose their grasp to people going to Bitcoin. And I agree with you, no one wants that. so that's why that's like the unhappy path that drives us to the happy path, hopefully.
Yeah, no, I am glad Bitcoin exists. I don't think any of us truly would probably be here without Bitcoin and what Bitcoin enabled. And so the fact that we do have kind of a escape hatch if things go terribly wrong, I am truly appreciative of. I guess maybe, yeah, it is fascinating. I mean, Bitcoin has had a long history, and I think it's still being written. But going forward do you think there are any particularly strong catalysts for either 2023 or 2024?
I think what's happening with ordinals is that it's this completely different use case than what people used to talk about. It's completely different. It has barely anything to do with digital gold except for the jewelry analogy. But it clicked and it worked. And I think that, hopefully what we can learn from that is that there are probably still unexplored use cases where Bitcoin can fit. People sometimes ask me, because I'm extremely bullish about Bitcoin the last year. I have been for 10 years, but I'm super bullish on Bitcoin the last year following what happened with ordinals. And people ask me, well, why? Do you think that Bitcoin is going to replace Ethereum now? And the answer is no, absolutely not. Bitcoin is not going to be a platform for application development. That's not going to happen. I don't think so. But there are some specific use cases that people have used Ethereum for that probably can work with Bitcoin. And we need to find those because I think there's a ton of opportunity in growing those use cases on Bitcoin.
Do you think Bitcoin block space should be used for more than just payments? It seems like yes, because you're a super fan of ordinals.
I mean, I don't think in terms of should and shouldn't, right? I think that if people want to, then if they find use in it, then it's great. And if they don't, that's also fine. But what we've seen is that people do find it useful for that other use case. We've also seen that people don't seem to find it very useful for the payment use case, So it's funny, more than 50% of the transactions in Bitcoin in the last few months consistently have been ordinals transactions. More than 50% of the transactions. That's a pretty big number. And, so I just don't think in terms of should or shouldn't. If that's the way that people want to use it, great. Let's press on that then.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, I think other protocols have very strict views on how their block space should be used. And so if we look at Ethereum was very commonly used to store blob data, call data for rollups. And Ethereum's okay, why don't we actually, instead of storing call data on L1, why don't we just create 4844 and store call data somewhere else so that the main chain can be used for transactions and not just storing call data for rollups. And so I was just kind of curious, is that philosophy also exist in Bitcoin or not? It seems like people are pretty open with what Bitcoin should be or could be.
It's funny, a lot of people are not open about that at all. but
you are open.
I have, but a lot of people are not. But the thing is that Bitcoin lets them do it, even if a lot of people are not open about it, right? So we just use it the way that we can, I guess is the.
I remember when block space was very cheap and we just store random messages on chain to annoy our friends, and we can't really do that anymore because it's kind of expensive. But
I apologize.
I guess, if Bitcoin just continues as is, continues kind of the route down with Taproot, ordinals, doesn't need Lightning, I guess, to succeed long-term kind of as usefulness, or can it just exist as is in its current state? Does it need to enable kind of a better payments rail?
I have a lot of unpopular takes about Lightning.
We'll
Do you wanna hear them?
I'll
Just
respond.
start with John, and then we'll pass it to Udi.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I think I'm bullish on Lightning long term as a payments for that payments use case. And again, we just need that fee pressure to necessitate its use more so. But just in Nashville a couple months ago, there was a Lightning conference, a ton of smart people coming together, talking about development of Lightning long term. It's not like people are giving up on it right now. And I mean, people want to. One of David's kind of points about Bitcoin earlier was this hodl mentality, for sure. But people also want to use their Bitcoin to do things. I mean, we saw that with people locking their Bitcoin up with Celsius and BlockFi, and they're kind of rug pull technology providers. So people are going to want to do things with Bitcoin. It is I agree that it's not really up to us to make a value statement on what's right or wrong to do. Your take on Lightning?
Yeah, Udi, why do you think the technology has not caught on as much as kind of it was hoped to, even though a lot of very smart people have focused on it?
So I've been a big Lightning bull since before it was live, and I've done the best I can to convince myself that it's great, but over the years I failed. I don't have anything against it. I think it's great that people are working on it, and I hope that they do extremely well. But there is a kind of a first principles question to ask, which is, who is it for? I think the answer to that question is Lightning is a payment system, so it's targeted at people who want to pay with Bitcoin. And I do not know any of those people. I've never met someone I've met some people who, as a kind of a gimmick, want to pay with Bitcoin, but very few people that I know that want to pay with Bitcoin as a day-to-day things, that want to go to a store and pay with Bitcoin, And then people would tell me, well, that's because you live in the West, and if you lived somewhere else, you would know that they don't have any alternative. But it turns out they do have an alternative, like stable coins, and they tend to use that more often than Bitcoin for payments. So my point is, I am not sure that there's a market for that solution currently, and maybe one day there will be, because maybe we reach that world where no other currencies exist or something. I don't know. So, maybe there's a future in that world. But yeah, I'm not a big Lightning bull just because I don't think people want to pay with Bitcoin right now.
All right, I'll pass it back to the audience again. We have 2-3 minutes left.
So I think the question was something like, well, stablecoins exist, but they're very centralized, and the only good decentralized alternative we have is something like Bitcoin and ETH. So maybe that's why people will adopt it for payments. And my answer is like, I hope so, I wish, but they don't seem to. It seems like people are fine, as far as I can see, with paying with centralized things for their day-to-day things. Again, not everyone. Some people do really want to pay with Bitcoin, but I think that's a very small minority.
So I'm curious about Udi's comment that you think Bitcoin will eventually be at the forefront again of innovation. If you don't really think that it will be used as that platform, what do you think that means?
I mostly think it used to be in the forefront. I don't necessarily am sure that it will be in the forefront of innovation again. I think that there's this gap that was created over time between Bitcoin and other ecosystems, and I think that gap will become much smaller. But I think that fundamentally Bitcoin has this tendency that people probably don't interact on chain as often as they do in other ecosystems. Bitcoin fundamentally probably is slow to change. by design intentionally, which is a big part of why it's great. So I think like there are fundamental reasons for why it is probably not going to be at the forefront of innovation. I just think that the gap that opened over the years is so big that it just makes a lot of sense to start closing the gap, because there's a lot of opportunities in doing that. There's a lot to learn, you know, for example, from the roll-up ecosystem about how to, without even thinking about scaling Bitcoin, how to bring more functionality to Bitcoin through research that has been done elsewhere. So I think that those things are probably going to happen.
And I'm going to steal back the last question for the panelists. Yes or no answer. In 5 years, is Bitcoin still at the top of kind of the coin market cap, or is it something else, or a smart contract platform that pushes it to not number one?
I mean, I don't like making predictions, but I think it will stay at number one. Just because I think Bitcoin is almost the only one that provides something that no other ecosystem can, which is that kind of stability and reliability that we talked about. I think there's a ton of other things that are interesting or happening elsewhere, but you know, like Ethereum has a lot of, in my view, maybe not a lot, but at least a small number of valid competitors, and Bitcoin doesn't. So that's why I think it's
Leland?
number one.
My personal opinion and not professional opinion is yes, because I believe Lindy assets are very important.
I would say yes also. Emphatic yes would be me.
And then maybe I'll end it with the spicy take of no. But thank you so much for everybody for coming and listening to the panel. I appreciate it.